Continue with our Discernment of Spirits Mondays. And so far, we have talked about the first three rules. So the first rule, when a person is moving away from God. The second rule, when a person is moving toward God. And then the third rule, that of spiritual consolation. Today we'll begin with rule number 4, which is that of spiritual desolation. And so I'm not going to read the rule today. I'm going to wait till next week for that. But let me just begin to unpack it a little bit, give a little intro to this rule today. So, again, important to pay attention to the adjective spiritual, right? So this is rule number 4, that of spiritual desolation. You may recall that when we spoke about spiritual consolation, we made this distinction, right? There's just normal, natural, non-spiritual consolations, and then there are spiritual consolations, right? And the distinguishing factor there had to do with when a consolation affects our love for God, our faith, or our following of His will. There's consolations that don't affect that, and then there's consolations that do, and those that do are spiritual consolations. Well, the same thing applies to desolation, right? We could speak about just natural, non-spiritual desolations and spiritual desolations. So, for example, let's say my football team loses. Shucks, like, not cool, right? I'm bummed. I'm a little bit desolate. Maybe it was a very important game. Maybe it was a final and we lost in the last few seconds. So I'm very bummed out. Well, maybe you'll experience a little bit of desolation, discouragement, a little bit of sadness, but hopefully it's not affecting your faith, at least not yet, or if it's not, right, then it's a non-spiritual desolation. Or maybe you miss your flight when you're about to go on vacation, or it gets canceled because of weather, and you're bummed you won't get to see your family sooner. It's going to be delayed for maybe a day or two, and so you experience some sort of desolation. But at least the beginning is not affecting your following of God's will, and so it's just a non-spiritual desolation. In contrast, maybe a spiritual desolation, now it's speaking about spiritual, maybe you fall into a sin that you're just not very proud of, right? And so you're discouraged, and maybe first it's just a non-spiritual desolation, you're discouraged, but then it starts becoming spiritual desolation. Thoughts as like the following starts coming to your mind, like, oh my gosh, like God is far away from me, or this whole thing of striving for holiness, like it's just not for me. The Christian life is just not for me. I can't do it. Look how weak I am. Why did I ever think that I could strive for holiness, or something like that? And you see a difference there. That desolation is beginning to affect your spiritual life, right? It's affecting your faith, it's affecting your following of God's will, and thus is a spiritual desolation. And so we see kind of that distinction. Now, as with spiritual consolations and just consolations in general, a non-spiritual consolation can be a springboard for a spiritual consolation, and so it's the same thing with desolation, right? Things that are natural can become supernatural. So for example, there could be a man that is pushing himself real hard at work to the max, and he's doing it for a couple months, and so it's taking a toll in his just natural life. He's tired all the time, a little bit discouraged. Relationships at work start getting kind of tense and difficult to sustain, same at home, and so this man begins to be just in a desolation, but not spiritual, right? Just like things are just rough, and he's tired all the time. Now, as this is happening, it becomes a springboard for maybe prayer to become just really, really difficult, and maybe during prayer, God seems very distant, right? And maybe this man begins to experience no desire to pray because he's so tired all the time. You see how the non-spiritual desolation kind of made a jump and starts becoming a spiritual desolation. Maybe just one last thing to mention today is that because of this relationship between non-spiritual and spiritual desolations and how the former can lead to the latter, we can begin to see an importance of taking care of ourselves in a human way, right? If I'm not getting proper rest, proper, exercise or whatever I need to be good physically, humanly speaking, naturally speaking, I could be, fostering, right, the possibility of spiritual desolation, which may affect my faith, right? And so sometimes we can't prevent spiritual desolations, but one way to begin to prevent them is just to take care of ourselves in the human matters, so as to not kind of create fertile soil for spiritual desolation. And so we'll continue with this rule next week in more depth.